Some secrets are buried by time while others are buried by wealth. For 24 years, a life-altering secret lay dormant, protected by a mother's love and a father's ruthless ambition. But one night, that secret walked into a restaurant wearing a $1,000 suit and sat in Esther Mitchell's section. To the struggling artist and waitress, he was simply a nightmare customer, arrogant, cruel, and impossible to please. She never imagined that the cold, dismissive eyes staring back at her were her own. She was looking at the man who gave her life, and then disappeared, the biological father she never knew existed. The clatter of porcelain and the low hum of entitled conversations were the soundtrack to Esther Mitchell's life. 5 nights a week she navigated the treacherous landscape of Aurelia, a restaurant where the price of a single steak could cover her rent for a month. Her real life, the one that mattered, happened in the quiet hours after her shift in her tiny studio apartment with charcoal under her fingernails and the smell of turpentine in the air. Her canvases were her escape, vibrant worlds of color and emotion that stood in stark contrast to the sterile, beige-toned existence of serving the city's elite. Tonight, however, the beige was stained with a particularly ugly shade of arrogance. It came in the form of the man in booth 4. He hadn't just walked in, he descended upon the restaurant like a storm cloud flanked by 2 other men in identical dark suits. Esther's manager, Mr. Gable, had scurried over his usual professional composure, replaced with a fawning nervousness she'd never seen before. "Mr. Sterling, what an honor. Your usual table is ready, of course." Damian Sterling didn't acknowledge him. His gaze sharp and cold as shattered ice swept across the dining room, dismissing it all as beneath him. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way, a strong jaw hair the color of dark pewter with distinguished silver at the temples and eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they landed on, including people. He was seated in Esther's section, a cruel twist of fate. From the moment she approached the table, the air crackled with tension. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Esther, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some water? We have still, or sparkling." Damian Sterling didn't even look at her. He was scrolling through something on his phone, his thumb moving with ruthless efficiency. "Perrier. Ice. 1 slice of lime cut into a wedge, not a wheel. Don't bruise the mint if you add it, and be quick about it." The dismissal was so profound it was almost comical. Esther forced a tight smile, her training kicking in. "Of course, sir." The rest of the order was a masterclass in condescension. He questioned the freshness of the sea bass, interrogated her on the specific region the wine came from, as if trying to catch her in a lie, and sent back his appetizer, a seared scallop dish, claiming it was tepid. The internal temperature of a scallop should be precisely 130 degrees Fahrenheit for optimal texture and flavor, he stated, pushing the plate towards her with 2 fingers. "This is lukewarm. An amateurish error. Have the chef make it again, properly." Esther's knuckles were white as she gripped the plate. Beside her she could feel Maria, her fellow waitress and best friend, shooting daggers from her eyes across the room. Maria knew Esther was 1 complaint away from being fired. Mr. Gable valued Aurelia's reputation and its wealthy clientele above all else. She returned with a new plate of scallops, her heart pounding. She placed it down gently. "My apologies, sir. I hope this is more to your liking." This time he looked at her. Really looked. His icy eyes traveled from her worn but polished black shoes up her crisp uniform to her face, lingering for a moment that felt unnervingly long. She had tied her honey blonde hair back in a simple, no-nonsense bun, but a few rebellious strands had escaped, framing a face that was often told it was too expressive for its own good. Right now, it was a mask of strained neutrality. He picked up his fork, took a bite, and chewed slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. It felt less like a meal and more like an execution. Finally, he swallowed. "Acceptable," he pronounced, and turned back to his companions, as if she had ceased to exist. Esther retreated, her cheeks burning. The man wasn't just rude, he was cruel. He seemed to derive a quiet satisfaction from demeaning her, from reminding her of her place in his world, invisible, insignificant, and expendable. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of her quiet servitude and his cold demands. When it was finally over, she brought the check. The bill was over $900. He dropped a black, impossibly heavy credit card into the leather folio without a word. When she returned with the slip for him to sign, he was already standing, shrugging on his tailored coat. He scribbled a signature and strode out of the restaurant, his entourage trailing in his wake like pilot fish. Esther walked over to retrieve the folio, her stomach in knots. She opened it, bracing herself. On the tip line next to his imperious signature was a single defiant slash, and below it, in the space for the total, he had written the exact amount of the bill. No tip. Not a single cent. It was a deliberate, calculated insult. It was a message: "You are worth nothing." Tears of pure rage and humiliation pricked at her eyes. She snatched the folio and hurried to the back, her breath catching in her throat. Maria was waiting for her by the lockers. "Let me guess," Maria said, her voice laced with venom. "Mr. CEO stiffed you." Esther just nodded, unable to speak, and showed her the receipt. "That son of a—" "I swear, Esther, some people are born without a soul. Don't let him get to you. He's just a miserable old man who has to pay for company." But it did get to her. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the casual cruelty, the utter lack of humanity. As she changed out of her uniform and into her worn jeans and hoodie, the insult churned in her gut. That night, when she stood before her canvas, she couldn't paint. The vibrant colors in her mind had been washed out, replaced by the cold, dismissive gray of Damian Sterling's eyes. She sketched his face instead, all sharp angles and shadows, a portrait of a man who had everything and nothing all at once. She didn't know why, but she felt a strange, inexplicable pull to capture the emptiness she'd seen lurking behind his power. A week passed. The memory of the man in booth 4 began to fade, filed away with the dozens of other unpleasant encounters that came with the job. Esther was focused on a new commission, a small mural for a local coffee shop called The Daily Grind. The owner, a kind man named Leo, had seen her portfolio online and loved her work. He was a gentle soul with warm, kind eyes and an easy laugh, the complete antithesis of Damian Sterling. Working on the mural was a breath of fresh air, a reminder of who she was beyond the apron and name tag. Then, on a Tuesday night, the storm cloud returned. Damian Sterling walked into Aurelia alone this time. The restaurant fell into a hush, the way a forest does when a predator is near. Mr. Gable practically tripped over himself, rushing to greet him. "Mr. Sterling." "A pleasure. Just you tonight?" "Yes." Damian said, his voice a low rumble. His eyes scanned the room, and to Esther's horror landed directly on her. A slow, chilling smirk touched his lips. "I'd like to be seated in that young ladies' section." Esther, I believe her name was. A cold dread washed over her. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a power play. Mr. Gable shot her a look that was a mixture of panic and warning. "Of course, sir. Right this way." Her hands trembled slightly as she filled his water glass. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Welcome back." "I'm only back because your chef is competent and the wine list is tolerable," he said, not looking at her. He perused the menu for a full 5 minutes of excruciating silence before snapping it shut. "I'll have the New York strip, medium rare. If it comes to my table even a degree over 135, I'll be sending it back. And bring me the Chateau Margaux, the 95. It was one of the most expensive wines on their list. A single bottle cost more than her car was worth. The entire meal was a tightrope walk. He was testing her, she knew it. He'd ask a question, and just as she began to answer, he'd cut her off to take a phone call, speaking in clipped, aggressive tones about mergers and acquisitions. He accidentally knocked his fork to the floor and watched to see how quickly she'd replace it. But something was different this time. Amidst the targeted rudeness, there were moments of strange, unnerving focus. He'd pause and just watch her. As she cleared a plate, as she refilled a glass, his gaze would fix on her with an intensity that made the hair on her arms stand up. "This job," he said, suddenly catching her off guard as she set down his steak. Is this what you plan to do with your life? Serve people? Esther straightened up, taken aback by the personal nature of the question. It's a job, sir. It pays the bills. A means to an end, he mused, cutting into the steak. He inspected the inside, then took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully before nodding, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. And what is the end? I'm not sure that's any of your business, she replied, her voice firmer than she intended. His lips quirked. Feisty. I suppose one needs to be to survive in a place like this. What's your last name, Esther Mitchell? She said, her jaw tight. Esther Mitchell. The name hung in the air between them. For a split second, the mask of cold indifference on Damien Sterling's face slipped. A shadow of confusion, of distant memory, flickered in his eyes before it was gone, replaced by his usual stony expression. He grunted a non-committal sound and returned to his meal. The rest of the dinner was silent. When the check came, he paid, and this time he left a tip. It was exactly 10%. Not generous, but not insulting. It was precise, calculated. A transaction. As Esther was clearing his table, she noticed he'd left something behind, a sleek silver pen. It looked expensive. She picked it up, intending to run it out to him, but his car, a black Maybach, was already pulling away from the curb. She slipped the pen into her apron pocket, thinking she'd return it if he ever came back. Meanwhile, in that Maybach, Damien Sterling was not thinking about his multi-million-dollar deal. He was thinking about a name. Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell. The name echoed from a part of his past he had bricked up and buried decades ago. A summer long before Sterling Enterprises was a global powerhouse. He was just Damien, a fiercely ambitious, broke college student working a summer job in a coastal town. She was Sarah, a free-spirited local artist who painted sunsets and laughed with her whole body. It was a whirlwind romance, intense and reckless. It had ended badly. He'd believed she was with him for the money he didn't even have, yet convinced by a jealous rival that she had betrayed his confidence. He'd been cruel, had said things he could never take back, and had left without a word, using the pain and anger to fuel the relentless drive that made him his fortune. He had never looked back. Until now. He pulled out his phone, not to call his broker in Tokyo, but his head of security and private investigation, a man named Arthur Harrison. Harrison, Damien's voice was clipped. I have a name. I want you to run a full background check. Discreetly. Sarah Mitchell. Also run a check on a Esther Mitchell. 24 years old. Works at a restaurant called Aurelia. Any connection between the two, Sir Harrison asked. Damien stared out at the blur of city lights, a cold, unfamiliar feeling coiling in his stomach. That he said, his voice gravelly, is what I intend to find out. The waitress. Her defiant eyes. The way a strand of her blonde hair fell across her forehead. It was an echo of a ghost he thought he'd long since exorcised. For the first time in over 20 years, Damien Sterling felt a crack in the icy fortress he'd built around his heart. And he wasn't sure if it was curiosity or if it was fear. Arthur Harrison was a man who traded in secrets. For 15 years he had been Damien Sterling's shadow, the quiet fixer who made problems disappear and unearthed truths that were buried deep. He was loyal, efficient, and utterly devoid of sentimentality, a perfect mirror for his employer. But the file he was compiling now felt different. The report on Esther Mitchell was straightforward. Born in St. Michael's Hospital, August 12th. Mother Sarah Mitchell. Father unknown. She had a clean record, a mountain of student loan debt from a 2-year stint at art school she couldn't afford to finish, and a series of service jobs. She was on paper unremarkable. The file on Sarah Mitchell was more difficult. She had passed away 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She'd lived a quiet life, moving a few times before settling in the city, always working just enough to support herself and her daughter. She had never married. Harrison's investigators found a few old friends, one of whom provided a photograph from Sarah's early 20s. Harrison printed the photo in high resolution and placed it in a sealed black folder. When Damien summoned him to his penthouse office, the city lights sprawling like a galaxy of diamonds below the atmosphere was heavy. Damien was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the door, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Report," he commanded without turning around. "We have the preliminary background checks," Sir Harrison said, his voice even. He laid the folder on the vast mahogany desk. Esther Mitchell, 24, no criminal record, financially struggling, currently employed at Aurelia. Her mother was Sarah Mitchell. Damien turned slowly. His face was an unreadable mask, but Harrison, who knew him better than anyone, could see the tension in his jaw. "And the mother deceased 3 years ago. Cancer," Harrison said. He tapped the folder. "We managed to acquire a photograph of her from approximately 25 years ago." Damien walked to the desk, his movements deliberate, almost hesitant. He picked up the folder, his long fingers tracing its edge before opening it. He stared at the photograph. It was her. Sarah. Younger, her face full of a light he had personally extinguished. Her smile wide and unburdened. She was standing on a beach, the wind catching her blonde hair, the same honey blonde as the waitress's. The resemblance was more than just a passing similarity. It was in the shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin, the ghost of a dimple in her left cheek. The whiskey glass trembled in his hand. The dates, the name, the face. It was a horrifying mosaic falling into place. 24 years ago, the summer he had left her. The math was brutally simple. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He sank into his leather chair, the photograph still in his hand. Every ruthless decision, every cold-hearted acquisition, every victory that had built his empire suddenly felt like ash in his mouth. He had a daughter. That defiant, proud waitress who had looked at him with such open contempt was his daughter, his flesh and blood. And she was living a life of struggle while he sat atop a throne of gold. The guilt was a physical blow, a phantom pain from a wound he never knew he had. But guilt was quickly followed by a storm of other emotions. Anger at Sarah for never telling him, shame at his own youthful cruelty, and a cold, terrifying wave of what responsibility, fear. He looked at Harrison, his eyes blazing with a desperate, frantic energy. "I need to know for sure. I need proof. Undeniable." Harrison had anticipated this. A DNA test would be conclusive, but acquiring a sample without her knowledge will be delicate. Damien's mind, the one that could dissect a hostile takeover in minutes, was already working. The pen. "I left a pen at the restaurant." She picked it up. "Find out if she still has it. If not..." He trailed off, looking at the city below. "I'll go back. I'll make an opportunity. A glass, a piece of silverware. Whatever it takes. Get it done, Arthur. Yesterday." Harrison nodded. "I'll handle it." As Harrison left, Damien remained at his desk, the photograph of Sarah clutched in his hand. He looked from her smiling face to the cold, sterile luxury of his office. He had spent a lifetime building walls to keep the world out, to protect himself from the kind of vulnerability he'd felt that summer with her. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He was powerful, untouchable, and utterly, profoundly alone. And now a ghost from his past had sent a living, breathing reminder of his greatest failure right to his table. A daughter who looked at him with her mother's eyes filled with a disdain he now realized he had more than earned. Esther, meanwhile, was sketching at the counter of the daily grind, putting the finishing touches on the mural design. Leo brought her a coffee, a gentle smile on his face. "It's looking incredible, Esther," he said, genuinely impressed. "You have a real gift." "Thanks, Leo. It's a nice change of pace from my other job," she said, a small, grateful smile touching her lips. In her bag, tucked away in a side pocket, was an expensive silver pen. She kept meaning to throw it out, but for some reason she hadn't. It was a strange memento from the rudest customer she'd ever had, a man she hoped to never see again. The DNA results came back a week later. Harrison delivered the news with his usual stoic demeanor, but the words carried the weight of a tectonic shift. "It's a 99.99% match, sir. Esther Mitchell is your biological daughter." Damien Sterling felt the air leave his lungs. There was no more doubt, no more speculation. It was a fact as cold and hard as the marble floors of his penthouse. He had a child, a daughter who was scraping by waitressing for tips while his own net worth was a figure with 10 zeros. His first instinct, the one honed by decades of corporate warfare, was to control the situation, to manage it. Problems in his world were solved with money. Emotions were liabilities, but money was a reliable, powerful tool. He would fix this. He would throw money at the problem until it went away. He decided against approaching her himself. What would he even say? "Hello, I'm the man who treated you like garbage last week, and by the way, I'm your father. My apologies for the last 24 years of non-existence." No. That was a conversation for which he had no script. It required a humanity he had long since suppressed. Instead, he did what he always did. He delegated. He summoned his top corporate lawyer, a shark named Robert Peterson. His instructions were precise. You will approach a young woman named Esther Mitchell. You will offer her a settlement, a trust fund, $5 million. In return, she signs this. He slid a thick document across the desk. It was a non-disclosure agreement, ironclad and unforgiving. The money is from an anonymous benefactor who was moved by her circumstances. She is to quit her job, relocate if she wishes, and never speak of this offer or the benefactor to anyone. Understood, Peterson, a man who had made careers disappear with similar documents, simply nodded. Perfectly, Mr. Sterling. 2 days later, Esther was finishing her shift when Mr. Gable told her a man was waiting for her in his office. She walked in to find a man in an immaculately tailored suit sitting opposite her manager's desk. He introduced himself as Robert Peterson, an attorney. "Miss Mitchell," he began, his voice smooth and impersonal. "I am here on behalf of a client who wishes to remain anonymous. My client has recently become aware of your financial hardships and your artistic talents." Esther frowned, confused and wary. "My hardships? My client is a patron of the arts and has a keen interest in supporting promising young talent before they are discovered. He was deeply impressed by your resilience and character." Peterson continued, his words clearly rehearsed. "To that end, my client has authorized me to make you an offer. He is prepared to establish a trust fund in your name in the amount of $5 million. Esther's jaw dropped. She looked at Mr. Gable, whose eyes were wide with shock, and then back at the lawyer. $5 million. Are you serious? Completely, Peterson said, pushing the thick document and a pen towards her. The funds would be yours to allow you to pursue your art without limitation. All that is required is your signature on this standard confidentiality agreement. It sounded too good to be true. A miracle. An escape from the endless cycle of rent and bills. She could finally finish art school, buy a real studio, travel for inspiration. Her mind reeled with the possibilities. But then a cold suspicion crept in. An anonymous benefactor impressed by her resilience. It sounded like something out of a bad movie. Her eyes narrowed. Who is your client? As I said, my client wishes to remain anonymous. I'm not signing anything until I know who this money is from, she stated, her voice firm. Peterson's professional smile tightened. That is a non-negotiable condition of the offer. And then it clicked. The strange, intense stare. The personal questions. The sudden return to the restaurant. The only wealthy person who had shown any interest in her life recently was Damian Sterling. But why would he do this? Was it a bizarre apology for his behavior? A way to assuage some rich man's guilt? The thought of taking money from that man, of being his secret charity case, made her stomach turn. It felt dirty. He had looked at her like she was nothing, and now he was trying to buy her silence to pay her off so he wouldn't have to deal with the unpleasantness of her existence. The offer wasn't an act of kindness. It was an act of dismissal, a more expensive version of leaving no tip. He was trying to erase her. She pushed the document back across the desk. No, she said, her voice quiet but ringing with conviction. Peterson blinked, genuinely stunned. I don't think you understand, Miss Mitchell. This is $5 million. I understand perfectly, she said, standing up. Please tell your client that I am not for sale. My life, my hardships, and my integrity are not commodities he can purchase to make himself feel better. I don't want his money. She turned and walked out of the office, leaving the lawyer and Mr. Gable speechless. Her heart was pounding, a wild mix of adrenaline and pride coursing through her. She had just turned down a fortune, an amount of money that would have solved every problem she had, and yet she had never felt richer. When Peterson reported back to Damien, he delivered the news with a rare tone of disbelief. She refused. She said she wasn't for sale. Damien Sterling stood motionless in his office, the phone receiver pressed to his ear. He had orchestrated hostile takeovers of billion-dollar corporations. He had bent senators and rivals to his will. He had built an empire on the simple principle that everyone and everything had a price. And a 24-year-old waitress, his own daughter, had just proven him wrong. She hadn't taken the bait. She hadn't taken the money. She had thrown his power right back in his face. The shock of it was profound. For the first time he saw her not as a problem to be managed, but as a person. A person with pride. A person with strength. A person, he realized with a jolt that shook him to his core, who was very much like him. The revelation didn't comfort him. It terrified him. Esther's refusal of the money sent a shockwave through Damien's carefully controlled world. His strategy had failed, his power rendered impotent. He was left with a reality he couldn't buy, bully, or delegate away. Frustrated and uncharacteristically lost, he resorted to a tactic he hadn't employed personally in years: surveillance. He wanted to understand her, not the waitress, but the woman, the daughter. Disguised in a simple cap and a jacket, a far cry from his usual bespoke suits, he began to watch her from a distance. He had Harrison track her schedule, and he would park his nondescript sedan blocks away from the coffee shop where she worked on her mural, or near the park where she sometimes ate her lunch. From the shadows of his tinted car window he saw a life unfold. He saw her on a ladder at the daily grind, her face smudged with paint, her expression one of pure, unadulterated joy, as she brought a drab brick wall to life with swirling blues and golds. He saw Leo hand her a coffee, their heads close together, as they laughed about something, and a sharp, unfamiliar pang of jealousy twisted in his gut. He followed her to a small public park one afternoon. She sat on a bench sketching furiously in a notepad. A homeless man approached her, and Damien's hand instinctively went to his phone to call security. But Esther just looked up, smiled, and offered the man half of her sandwich. They spoke for a few minutes, and she listened with a genuine interest that Damien knew was completely unfeigned. She wasn't performing for anyone. It was just who she was. He saw her mother in those moments. Sarah's effortless kindness, her ability to see the humanity in everyone, qualities he had once mistaken for naivete. One evening, Harrison's research led him to a small cemetery on the outskirts of the city. He found Sarah Mitchell's grave. It was a simple headstone marked with her name and a single line, "She found the beauty in everything." Damien went there late one night when the moon was high and the air was cold. He stood before the stone, the name a silent accusation. The wind rustled the leaves, the only sound in the profound silence. "I was a fool, Sarah," he whispered the words, tasting like rust in his mouth. "I was young and arrogant and terrified. I thought you betrayed me, and instead of asking, instead of trusting you, I ran. I buried myself in work and money. I built an empire on the foundations of that mistake." He looked at the name engraved in the granite. "And she, our daughter, she's just like you. She has your light, and she looks at me with a hatred I more than deserve." He stayed there for an hour, a silent, solitary vigil, the billionaire titan reduced to a man haunted by the ghosts of his own making. But Damien wasn't the only one watching Esther. His fiancée, Isabella Ashford, was a woman carved from the same ambitious marble as Damien. Theirs was a relationship of convenience and power, a merger of two influential families. Isabella was beautiful, intelligent, and keenly aware of the precariousness of her position. She had noticed the change in Damien. The late-night phone calls, the unexplained absences, the dark, brooding moods. Her suspicions led her to hire her own private investigator, a man more discreet and far more ruthless than Harrison. It didn't take him long to connect the dots: the multiple visits to Aurelia, the background check on a waitress named Esther Mitchell, the secret DNA test. When her investigator presented her with the file complete with photographs of Esther, Isabella's blood ran cold. It wasn't a mistress. It was worse. A long-lost heir. A direct threat to her claim on the Sterling fortune and legacy. An illegitimate daughter was a complication she could not afford. A wicked, brilliant plan began to form in her mind. Damien was trying to handle this quietly to keep it buried, but secrets were only powerful when they were kept. Exposed to the light, they could become weapons. She would not use this secret to confront Damien. No, that would be too simple. She would use it to destroy Esther and humiliate Damien in one fell swoop, ensuring he would have no choice but to cut the girl out of his life for good, solidifying her own position at his side. Her opportunity came in the form of the annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala, the most high-profile social event of the year. Damien's foundation had recently announced a new initiative, the Emerging Artist Grant. It was the perfect cover. Isabella made a call to the foundation's event coordinator. "There's been a last-minute addition to the grant finalists," she said, her voice like honeyed poison. "An artist I've been scouting personally. Her name is Esther Mitchell. I want her sent a formal invitation to the gala. And make sure she gets a +1. We want her to feel celebrated." The trap was set. Isabella smiled, looking at her reflection in the mirror. In the cutthroat world of the elite, you didn't just eliminate a threat, you turned it into a public spectacle. The invitation arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope with the Sterling Foundation's crest embossed in gold. Esther stared at it, her heart doing a frantic tap dance against her ribs. "Finalist for the Emerging Artist Grant," she read aloud to Maria, her voice filled with disbelief. "An exclusive invitation to the Sterling Foundation Charity Gala." "Esther, this is it!" Maria shrieked, grabbing her in a hug. "This is your big break. I told you your work was incredible. The universe is finally paying you back for dealing with all those corporate jerks." A flicker of suspicion crossed Esther's mind. Sterling Foundation? Was it connected to him? She pushed the thought away. It had to be a coincidence. The Sterling name was plastered on buildings all over the city. Besides, what would a man like Damien Sterling care about a grant for unknown artists? This felt real, a legitimate acknowledgement of her talent. "It says I have a +1, Esther said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I was thinking, I should ask Leo." Leo was overjoyed for her and readily accepted. He helped her find a dress at a high-end consignment shop, a simple, elegant midnight blue gown that made her feel like a princess from a forgotten fairy tale. For the first time in a long time, she felt a genuine surge of hope. Maybe her life was finally turning a corner. The night of the gala, she was a nervous wreck. The ballroom of the Regent Grand Hotel was a dizzying spectacle of chandeliers, champagne fountains, and the city's most powerful people. Leo squeezed her hand reassuringly as they walked in. "You belong here just as much as any of them," he whispered. Damien saw her the moment she entered. He was standing across the room talking to a senator with Isabella clinging to his arm. When his eyes met Esther's, he froze mid-sentence. He hadn't known she would be here. She looked radiant. The simple elegance of her dress put the gaudy jewel-encrusted gowns of the other women to shame. She looked so much like Sarah it stole his breath. A cold panic seized him. This was wrong. She shouldn't be here. This was his world, a world of predators and politics, not hers. He started to move towards her to get her out of there, but Isabella's grip on his arm tightened like a vice. "Darling, don't be rude to the senator," she murmured, her smile never faltering. "Let the girl enjoy herself. It's a big night for her." The glint in Isabella's eyes was triumphant. She had him trapped. The award ceremony began. The host announced the finalists for the art grant. Esther's name was called last. She stood with the other artists near the stage, her hands clammy, her heart pounding with anticipation. The host then welcomed Isabella Ashford to the stage to say a few words about the importance of nurturing new talent. Isabella glided to the microphone, a vision in crimson silk. She scanned the crowd, her gaze landing on Esther with a predatory smile. "Good evening," she began, her voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "The Sterling Foundation believes in lifting up those from humble beginnings, in finding diamonds in the rough. And tonight we have a truly remarkable story of resilience." She paused for dramatic effect. "One of our finalists, Esther Mitchell, is a particularly inspiring example. Not just a gifted artist, but a full-time waitress at Aurelia, one of my fiancé's favorite restaurants." A polite murmur went through the crowd. Esther felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. Isabella's smile widened. But what no one here knows is that her connection to the Sterling name is much, much deeper. You see, her story isn't just one of rags to potential riches, it's a family reunion. She turned her gaze directly to Damien, who had gone pale, his face a mask of cold fury. "Isn't that right, Damien?" Isabella's voice was sickly sweet. "Isn't it a touching philanthropic tale, finding your long-lost illegitimate daughter serving you scallops and then weeks later nominating her for a prestigious award? Tell us all, Damien. Was this your way of finally welcoming her into the family?" The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight that sucked all the air out. Then a gasp. A reporter in the front row began furiously typing on his phone. The flash of a camera went off, then another and another. Esther felt the floor drop out from under her. The words didn't make sense. Long-lost daughter. Illegitimate. The room started to spin. Her eyes darted from Isabella's smug, victorious face to Damien Sterling, the man who had tormented her, the man who had offered her hush money. His face was a maelstrom of shock and rage. But in his eyes she saw the one thing she couldn't deny: the truth. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This man, this cold, cruel, soulless man, was her father. The humiliation was a hot, searing wave. This wasn't an award. It was an ambush. She was a prop in a twisted drama she didn't understand. The flashes of the cameras felt like punches. The whispers of the crowd were like venom in her ears. She turned and fled. She stumbled through the crowd, blind with tears, the grand ballroom transforming into a gilded cage. "Esther, wait!" Leo yelled, pushing through the throng of reporters that was now swarming around her. He reached her at the door, wrapping a protective arm around her and shielding her from the onslaught of questions and cameras as he guided her out into the cold night air. Back in the ballroom, Damien Sterling moved with a speed and fury no one had ever seen from him. He strode up to Isabella, his voice a low, terrifying growl that was meant for her alone. "You're finished," he hissed. He then turned to his head of security. "Get her out of my sight. Now!" He watched as a stunned and suddenly terrified Isabella was escorted out, her perfect plan having backfired in the most spectacular way. He had won the battle, but the war for his daughter's soul, he feared, had just been irrevocably lost. The entire world now knew his secret, and the one person he needed to hear it from him had learned it in the cruelest way imaginable. The aftermath was a media firestorm. The Waitress heiress, Sterling's secret daughter. The headlines were plastered across every news site and tabloid. Esther's face was everywhere. Reporters camped outside her apartment building, shouting questions every time she dared to peek out her window. Her life, once small and private, had become a public spectacle overnight. She felt shattered, betrayed, and utterly alone. She unplugged her phone, ignoring the hundreds of calls and texts. Leo stayed with her for the first day, a quiet, steady presence who made her tea and chased off the more aggressive paparazzi. But eventually she needed to face the wreckage by herself. The man she had despised was her father. The mother she had adored had kept the most fundamental secret of her life from her. Every memory, every struggle was now cast in a new, distorted light. Why had her mother never told her? Was she trying to protect her from him, or was she ashamed? The questions circled endlessly with no one left to answer them. Damien, meanwhile, was in his own personal hell. He had systematically destroyed Isabella's social standing and started the legal process to dismantle their business ties. But it brought him no satisfaction. The image of Esther's devastated face as she fled the ballroom was burned into his mind. He had allowed her to be publicly crucified. He tried to reach her, sending messages through Harrison, through Leo, whom his team had identified and contacted. The messages all came back the same. She doesn't want to see you. He was sitting in his cavernous office staring at the photo of Sarah when Arthur Harrison walked in. Sir Harrison said, his voice softer than Damien had ever heard it. The lawyers can handle the Isabella Ashford situation. The PR team can manage the media fallout, but they can't fix this. He gestured vaguely towards the world outside the window. There is no protocol for this. No strategy. For once in your life, Mr. Sterling, stop being a CEO. Don't send a lawyer. Don't send an emissary. Don't send money. Just go be a person. Go be a father. The words hit Damien with the force of a physical blow. Harrison was right. All his life he had hidden behind his power and his wealth. It was time to face the consequences without a shield. He drove himself. No chauffeur, no security detail. He took a simple town car and parked it a block away from her apartment building, a modest walk-up brick building that felt a world away from his penthouse. He slipped past the few remaining reporters, his face hidden by a cap, and walked up the 3 flights of stairs. He stood outside apartment 3B, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way it hadn't since he was a young man facing his first major business rival. He raised a hand and knocked. The silence on the other side of the door was deafening. He knocked again, more gently this time. "Esther, it's Damien. Please, just 5 minutes." He heard shuffling, and then the chain slid. The door opened a crack. She was pale with dark circles under her eyes. She looked at him with an expression that was a painful mix of anger, hurt, and utter exhaustion. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy. "To talk," he said simply. "Not here. Let me come in. Please." She hesitated for a long moment, then unlatched the chain and opened the door, stepping back to let him in. Her apartment was small but clean, filled with the evidence of her life. Canvases were stacked against one wall, some finished, some blank. The air smelled of paint and coffee. It was a home, not a showroom. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the small living room, a titan in a world not built to his scale. "I am so sorry, Esther," he began the words, feeling clumsy and inadequate. "For what happened at the gala. For all of it. There is no excuse for what Isabella did or for my failure to protect you from it." Esther wrapped her arms around herself, a fragile barrier. "Protect me. You didn't even know me. You had me investigated. You tried to pay me off to disappear." Was that protecting me? He didn't flinch from the accusation. He deserved it. No. That was me being a coward. That was me trying to manage a situation I didn't know how to handle. When I found out that you were my daughter, I didn't know what to do. My entire life, my solution to every problem has been money. It was a mistake. An insulting, arrogant mistake. He finally looked around the room at the art, at the life she had built. "Your mother, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "We met one summer. We were young. I was nobody, just a kid with ambition that outweighed his sense of decency. I thought she had betrayed me. I was wrong. I was proud and stupid, and I left. I never knew about you. I swear to you I never knew." He told her everything. About the fight, about his foolish pride, about building his empire to prove to the world and to himself that he didn't need anyone. He didn't make excuses or ask for pity. He just laid the ugly, unvarnished truth at her feet. Esther listened, her hard expression slowly softening as she saw the cracks in the invincible CEO's armor. For the first time, she saw not the monster from the restaurant, but a broken, lonely man who had been running from his past for a quarter of a century. Tears streamed down her face. Tears of anger, of grief for the mother she missed, and for the father she never had. "Why didn't she tell me?" she whispered. "I think," Damien said softly, "she was protecting you. From me. From the man I became. She built a life for you, a good one, away from all of this." He gestured to the window towards the city that bore his name. "She gave you a real life. I only know how to give people a balance sheet." There was a long silence. The chasm between them was vast, built of secrets and years and pain. "I don't want your money," Esther said finally, her voice clear and steady. "I know," he replied. "I'm not offering it. But I would like, if you would let me, to get to know my daughter." He looked at her canvases. "And I would like to get to know the artist." He told her about an idea he'd had, something that felt right. He wanted to start a real arts foundation, not a vanity project, but a meaningful one. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation, dedicated to providing scholarships to struggling young artists so they could finish their education. "It wouldn't be from me to you," he explained. "It would be from her, her legacy. You would be the first recipient, no strings attached." Esther looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. It wouldn't be easy. It might not even work. The trust was shattered, the pain was still raw. But for the first time, the path forward wasn't completely dark. "I need time," she said. "Take all the time in the world," he replied, a wave of relief washing over him. "I'm not going anywhere." The story didn't end there. It began. It began with awkward coffee meetings, with hesitant phone calls. It began with Damien attending one of Esther's small art shows, standing awkwardly in the back, just watching. It began with Esther agreeing to visit her mother's grave with him, the two of them standing in silence before the simple stone. It was a slow, fragile, and messy process of two strangers bound by blood learning to forgive the past and tentatively, carefully building a future. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a real one. A testament to the fact that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal, and that sometimes the most valuable thing a father can give his daughter is simply a second chance. And so the story of the waitress and the CEO comes to a close. But the journey of Esther and Damien was just beginning. Theirs is a powerful reminder that behind every face, rich or poor, is a story of love, loss, and regret. It shows us that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or penthouses, but in the connections we build and the courage it takes to mend what is broken. It's a story about forgiveness, not just forgiving others, but forgiving ourselves for the mistakes of our past. What would you have done in Esther's shoes? Could you have found it in your heart to forgive a father who entered your life like a storm? If this story touched your heart and made you think, please let us know in the comments below. Your engagement helps our community grow. And don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story with heart, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for listening.